If you're someone drawn to unsolved mysteries, then you're probably no stranger to those strange disappearances, cases where every clue seems to fall just short of revealing the truth. And chances are, even without much introduction, one name might come to mind. Donald Izzett Jr. This case is often remembered when we talk about young people who vanished in the midst of discovering who they really were, those brave enough to live authentically, only to pay the price in nearly 3 decades of silence. The disappearance happened in the summer of 1995. Donald, or Donnie, as his loved ones called him, was just 19 years old. He made a phone call to his mother from a payphone in California. His voice was shaking. He said he was scared, that someone was following him. Then the line cut out, and no one ever heard Donnie's voice again. Nearly 30 years have passed, and the question remains unanswered: who is responsible for the disappearance of Donald Izzett Jr.? You're watching Hidden Echoes, where forgotten stories are told with respect, emotion, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Today, we revisit the case of Donald Izzett Jr., a life interrupted, a call for help unheard, and a mother who never gave up. Donald Lee Izzett Jr., or Donnie, as his loved ones called him, was born on November 5th, 1975 in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and raised in a small town in western Maryland by his mother, Deborah Skelly. Donnie was a deeply sensitive child, emotional, expressive, and never afraid to show affection. From a young age, he loved writing letters, making cards, recording his voice, and sending it to family. He left a lasting impression wherever he went, not through noise or drama, but through a heart that listened and understood. To his mother, he was everything. Deborah once said, "He was my light. He still hugged me, even at nearly 20. He was smart, curious, a dreamer. But Donnie was also unapologetically himself, and in 1990s America, that wasn't always safe. After graduating high school, Donnie made a surprising choice. He joined the U.S. military, but just months later, he was discharged. Not because he lacked ability, but because he openly admitted he was gay, a truth that didn't fit under the military's don't ask, don't tell policy at the time. That rejection wasn't just a lost opportunity, it was a wound to his sense of self. Pushed out of the one institution he thought might give him purpose, Donnie spiraled between confusion and determination, fighting to prove he still belonged somewhere. That's when he planned a cross-country trip. No itinerary, no attachments, just a journey to go and feel, as he wrote in a letter to a friend. In April 1995, Donnie left home with light luggage, a few planned stops, and a stack of birthday cards and letters pre-written for his mother. He even left her a birthday card in advance, just in case. It wasn't the act of someone planning to disappear. It was someone who truly believed he'd be back. Along the way, Donnie visited Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Florida, New Mexico, and Arizona. He called his mother constantly, updating her on every step. Deborah remembers, "He told me about the giant cacti in South Arizona, the ocean at night in Florida. I always knew he was okay, until I didn't." He met many people along the road, including Shane Gunther, a slightly older man and former fitness trainer from California. They met by chance, then kept traveling together. Donnie drove Shane's Ford Mustang and was ticketed for speeding in Arizona. That traffic stop became the last confirmed record proving Donnie was alive and moving. Something about Shane drew Donnie in, though no one knows exactly what. But for someone searching for belonging, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to ride alongside you. The two reached Macomb, Mississippi, where Shane's mother lived. They stayed there for several days. Then, things started to blur. On May 14th, 1995, Donnie called his mother from a payphone in Santos, Monica, California. Deborah remembers every second of that call. Donnie wasn't himself. He didn't sound excited like before. His voice was low, choked. Then he cried, "Mom, I want to come home," he said. It was the first time during his whole trip that he admitted to being scared. He said someone was listening. Then the line cut, and silence took over. No one ever heard from Donnie again. Not another call. Not another letter. Deborah tried calling the payphone back, but it was too late. Days turned into weeks, then months. No updates, no clues, no answers. That wasn't like Donnie. This was the boy who mailed birthday cards a month. Early, vanishing without a trace wasn't in his nature, but police at the time assumed Donnie had probably just needed some time off. No alarms, no real search. To Deborah, it was a double betrayal. Her son vanished, and so did the system meant to protect him. That's when she began a new journey. Not one of healing, but one of searching, of asking why the child she loved more than anything disappeared into silence. And maybe, just maybe, the answer had always been there, in the words Donnie couldn't finish saying during that final call. Immediately after that final phone call from Santa Monica, every trace of Donnie began to fade, scattered, fragmented, impossible to follow. But there was one piece that stood out, one stop along. His journey that would later become the center of suspicion, the small town of Macomb, Mississippi. It was there that Donnie and Shane stayed for several days at the home of Shane's mother. People in the neighborhood recalled seeing the two young men together, walking, talking, sometimes arguing. But one weekend afternoon, something changed. A loud argument broke out between Donnie and Shane. Shane's mother later admitted she heard yelling, doors slamming, and what sounded like a loud bang, but at the time, she assumed it was just a disagreement between friends. No one imagined that it might have been the last moment Donnie was alive. A few days later, Shane left town alone. The Ford Mustang Donnie had been driving was gone. No one went with him. No explanations. No follow-up. At that point, Deborah had no idea her son had ever been in Mississippi. As far as she knew, he was still somewhere in California, just unreachable. But if someone had connected the dots back then, it might have pointed her in a completely different direction. A different question might have been asked much sooner. What really happened in that small house after that? Fight between two young men after weeks with no contact. Deborah officially reported her son missing, but the response from law enforcement was dismissive. Donnie's an adult. He can go wherever he wants, they told her. Police didn't open a case right away. No alerts were issued. They assumed he was off exploring and didn't want to be found. That narrative couldn't have been further from what Deborah knew. Donnie never just disappeared. He was the kind of person who mailed birthday cards a month in advance. If he stopped calling, it meant something was seriously wrong. But her concern, like so many others from desperate mothers, was brushed off as emotional overreaction. In the years that followed, Deborah began her own investigation. She contacted police departments in every city along her son's last known route. She saved everything: handwritten letters, receipts, greeting cards, even the speeding ticket Donnie received while driving Shane's car in Arizona. Every scrap became a thread, something to pull on, hoping it would reveal the full picture. But that picture always felt like it was missing one critical piece. That's why Deborah never stopped. Because to her, this wasn't just about a missing son. It was a battle against a system that ignored the voice of a single mother from a small town and the pain of a son who had once been cast out for simply being who he was. Then in 2019, 24 years after Donnie vanished, everything shifted. Deborah, alongside a group of volunteer advocates, returned to Macomb, Mississippi, where she'd finally learned Shane had once taken Donnie. With permission to investigate, the group brought in a semi-professional excavation team to the property that had once belonged to Shane's mother. There, they uncovered an area of scorched, sunken ground, signs of intense burning. They began to dig. What they found were ashes, charred debris, pieces of metal, and bone fragments. The remains were sent to a forensic lab for analysis, but could not be immediately identified. Around the same time, Kyle Barnes, a former friend of Shane, came forward in a bombshell interview. He claimed he had been present the night Donnie was murdered. According to Kyle, Donnie and Shane got into a heated argument. Then Shane pulled a gun and shot Donnie. Afterward, they burned his body in the backyard. Kyle said he had stayed silent for 24 years out of fear and guilt. But when he heard Deborah was digging on that property, he could no longer keep the secret. His confession sent shockwaves through a case that had long gone cold. But there was one problem: no body, no gun, no physical evidence directly tying Shane to the crime. Shane denied everything. Kyle had nothing to offer but his word. And without proof, the police couldn't press charges. The case, once again, stalled in limbo. But for Deborah, the question was no longer, did something happen to Donnie? She knew. The question now was, how could it happen and stay buried in silence for nearly 30 years without anyone being held accountable? When Kyle Barnes's confession came to light, all eyes turned to Shane. Gunther, the last known person to have been with Donnie. But Shane refused interviews. He didn't respond to the press, to police, or to Donnie's grieving mother. For years, Shane maintained near total silence. Under growing public pressure, his legal representative issued only a brief statement. Shane denied any involvement and claimed he had never acted violently toward Donnie. What stood out was this: though never charged with a crime, Shane never offered to cooperate. He never clarified what really happened during those final days Donnie was with him. From there, the story splintered. On one side was Kyle's emotionally charged account as some man racked with guilt who claimed he helped Shane burn Donnie's body after a fatal argument. On the other side was Shane's silence, complicating matters. Kyle had not been in contact with Shane for years, and no one could say for sure what motivated him to come forward after nearly a quarter century. Some questioned whether Kyle was shifting blame or reshaping memories to ease his own conscience. But others believed it takes a profound burden to confess something like that unprompted. Kyle had no criminal history, no apparent agenda, and his account lined up with location, timing, and the very spot where Deborah's team had uncovered signs of a fire. So if it wasn't true, why so many coincidences? Kyle's statement cracked open a new chapter in the investigation, but also revealed major gaps in the case's early handling. For years, no one had thoroughly searched the Macomb property where Shane once lived. No search warrants, no soil samples, no interviews with neighbors from the time Donnie disappeared. It wasn't until Deborah returned, with volunteers, shovels, and media cameras, that the land even got attention. The local police, now under pressure, agreed to collect the burned fragments Deborah's team had found, but said they didn't yet have the funding to test them. The case slowed again. Deborah said she often felt like a mother screaming into the desert. No one listened. No one helped, partly because the case was old, but also because, in the eyes of the system, Donnie didn't fit the image of a perfect victim. He was gay, discharged from the military, traveling alone without a fixed itinerary. That made it easier for his case to be labeled as just another lost soul choosing to disappear. But that was never the truth. Letters, calls, and witness accounts all pointed to the same thing. Donnie loved his mother. He kept in touch. He never gave any sign of running away. If Deborah's voice had been taken seriously from the start, things might have been different. But the reality is, a disappearance only becomes a case when someone believes it deserves to be one. Otherwise, it's just someone who never came home. 1 year after Kyle's confession, a new voice stepped into the story. A former neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived next door to Shane's mother in 1995, came forward. She recalled a night in mid-May when she saw a large fire blazing behind the house. It struck her as strange. The grass was tall and no one usually burned anything back there. She remembered the acrid smell that lingered for days. When asked why she never reported it, she answered, "Honestly, I thought they were just burning trash. Around here, that's common." But when she later saw Donnie's face on the news, she started piecing things together. She felt a weight in her chest and decided to speak, even if it was late. Her testimony wasn't enough to convict anyone, but it gave new weight to Kyle's account. The two had never spoken, yet their descriptions of the fire, the timing, the smell all matched. Still, with so much time passed, police admitted there was little left to verify. Fire had erased the evidence. All that remained were memories and holes no one could quite fill. The case became a maze. Every testimony a door, but no key to unlock the truth. That's when people began to realize justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel or a gun. Sometimes it starts with a long-delayed confession, or the memory of a neighbor who once thought that fire in the yard was nothing unusual. And for Deborah, every detail, no matter how small, is a reason to keep going. Because nothing cuts deeper than a mother who doesn't know what happened to the child she once heard cry over the phone and then never heard again. Kyle Barnes's confession, raw, unprompted, and detailed, did more than catch the attention of investigators. It sent a ripple through the community that had followed Donnie's story for decades. In a recorded interview from 2021, Kyle sat in a small room, hands tightly clasped, voice steady but slow. He didn't cry, but his eyes, haunted and unguarded, revealed the truth. This wasn't a story he wanted to tell. It was one he could no longer hold. Kyle recounted the night in 1995. He was there, at the house in Macomb. He described a heated argument between Shane and Donnie, tension thick in the air. Then, suddenly, Shane pulled a gun. 3 shots broke the silence. Donnie collapsed. Blood, smoke, and a terrifying void. In shock, Shane dragged Donnie's body out back. Kyle, frozen in horror, didn't stop him. He helped light the fire. Wrapped in an old blanket, doused in gasoline, the body burned. The acrid smell clung to their clothes, their hair, and, forever, to Kyle's memory. They left the property before sunrise. No threats, no words, just silence, like a pact neither wanted to name. Kyle wasn't coerced. He wasn't threatened. But he was paralyzed by fear, guilt, and the crushing uncertainty of whether that made him complicit. He stayed silent for 24 years until he learned Deborah was still searching. That, he said, was the moment he couldn't carry it anymore. At the time, many people asked, why would someone like Kyle come forward if none of it were true? He gained nothing, only scrutiny, suspicion, and sleepless nights. Maybe what Kyle wanted wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it was freedom, of a kind he lost the night Donnie died. After Kyle's confession, attention shifted once again to Shane Gunther, who had remained largely in the background of the case, never officially named a suspect. Shane had once lived in California, worked as a fitness trainer, and was described as confident, intense, and very controlling. Some of Donnie's old friends admitted they had felt uneasy when they learned Donnie was traveling with Shane. Donnie had occasionally spoken of him in a conflicted way, like someone who was drawn in, yet unsure. One college friend remembered Donnie saying, "He can make me feel like I matter, but he can also make me feel like nothing." Those words weren't evidence, but they hinted at something deeper, an imbalance, tension, a relationship that may have never been just travel, buddies. There may have been power struggles, quiet, arguments, unspoken fear, things Donnie never fully shared. Throughout the later stages of the investigation, Shane never publicly addressed what happened. He neither confirmed nor denied being in Macomb with Donnie. When contacted by reporters and documentary filmmakers, Shane declined to comment. His silence didn't convict him, but it didn't ease suspicion either. If Kyle was telling the truth, why was Shane still free? If Kyle was lying, why did his story match so many details? And if it wasn't Shane, then who? When? Deborah first heard Kyle's confession. She didn't cry. She sat still for a long moment and asked, "He said, they burned my son?" Where? It wasn't because she needed to prove a crime. It was because, deep down, she still hoped she was wrong. That Donnie was somewhere else, alive, under another name. But Kyle's voice, the vivid details, the moments no one could invent, they shattered that hope. Deborah wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking an ending, a place to lay a headstone. Someone, anyone, to be held accountable. She began writing letters to police departments across the state. She sent them Kyle's testimony, video footage, photos from the dig site, and formal requests to test the bone, fragments found at Macomb. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply asked for what every mother deserves, the truth. At this point, the system's silence wasn't hesitation. It was a choice. Because once there's a confession, a location, a corroborating witness, even without a body or a weapon, Choosing not to act is choosing to turn away. And Deborah knew if she didn't keep pushing, Donnie's story would vanish again, like so many cold cases that never found answers. From that moment on, the search wasn't just for her son. It was for justice, for a 19-year-old boy who made a phone call in the middle of the night saying he was scared and then was never heard from again. And if the world couldn't do the right thing, then the very least, Deborah would not let her son disappear without leaving behind an echo. After Kyle Barnes's confession was made public, Deborah hoped it would be the turning point, the moment that would finally shatter the silence. Instead, she found herself stepping into a gray zone where everything hovered in limbo and everyone began to pull away. Despite a direct confession, despite physical clues that matched Kyle's account, the justice system didn't make an arrest. No one was charged. Prosecutors claimed there wasn't enough physical evidence. Forensic labs hadn't confirmed whether the bone fragments were human, or if they were, they hadn't identified to whom they belonged. Police remained silent. That's when Deborah realized something painful. Sometimes truth isn't enough unless it comes with pressure. But what hurt more was watching quiet divisions form. Within the very community that once stood by her, some began to question Kyle's story. They said maybe he made it up, maybe his motives weren't clear. Those close to Shane insisted he was a good man, never violent. Even a few of Deborah's longtime supporters began hesitating, worried about being pulled deeper into a complicated, long-running case. She didn't blame them. She understood when there's no body, no DNA, no second witness, even good intentions must lean on faith. And faith, when placed between overlapping shadows of doubt and fear, can fracture easily. What hurt the most, though, was beginning to question her own instincts. There was a time when Deborah believed she was getting close to the truth. But now, everything in her hands felt like dust. The truth was there. She could see its shape through the fogged glass, but no matter how hard she reached, she couldn't touch it. Back in 2004, nearly a decade after Donnie disappeared, one of Deborah's search team volunteers made a discovery. Beneath the soil and rubble in the backyard of the Macomb property, they found a white sneaker. It wasn't definitive evidence, but when Deborah saw it, she knew. It was one of Donnie's. She remembered buying it for his birthday. She recognized a small scuff on the side, one Donnie used to complain about after a pickup game of basketball. The shoe was no longer whole, but the passage of time had only made it heavier than any lab result. Deborah held it like she was holding her son. That shoe couldn't have moved there on its own. It couldn't have ended up buried, right where Kyle said Donnie's body had been burned, if Donnie hadn't been there. But a shoe doesn't have DNA, and without DNA, to the legal system, it's nothing more than an unclaimed object, a loose thread, a clue. That doesn't count. That was the moment Deborah understood. Her son's story might never be told in a courtroom. There might never be a trial, never a verdict. The truth might only live in what she had managed to gather. A cut-off phone call, a delayed confession, scorched patch of earth, and an old sneaker. And still, she made a choice. If justice wouldn't come to her, she would keep walking toward it with all those pieces in her arms to create a memory no one could deny. A memory of Donnie, of a boy who once lived, once loved, once dreamed, and who deserved to be remembered for exactly the person he fought so hard to be. In 2020, Deborah stood quietly on that patch of land in Macomb, the Gestite place she believes her son's life came to an end. In her hands was an old birthday card Donnie once sent. Her, the handwriting slightly shaky but clear. "No matter where I am, you'll always be my home." She note. Longer, hoped to find a full set of remains. She wasn't waiting for a trial, but she was still there, like someone holding the last flame against the cold wind of forgotten stories. To many, Donnie's disappearance is just another unsolved case, buried in a stack of cold files from the past. But to Deborah, it was never just a missing person. It was an entire life cut short, a youth interrupted before he could finish dreaming, a voice crying out in the night that no one heard. Maybe justice will come someday. Maybe Shane will speak. Maybe a DNA sample will finally match Donnie's records. But maybe it won't. Maybe the truth will remain locked behind a door no one ever opens. And the question, what happened to Donald Izzett Jr., will echo again and again in conversations, in articles, in the minds of those who still believe that every life, even those that vanished, deserves to be remembered by name. Some stories don't have endings, not because no one knows, but because no one else has the right to end them. Donnie Izzett Jr.'s disappearance isn't just an open case. It's proof that truth doesn't always echo from a courtroom. It often comes from the hearts of those who refuse to be silent. There's something Deborah once said in an interview that has stayed with many. If I could speak to my son last time, I wouldn't ask what happened. I'd just say, I'm still here. I never left. And maybe for a mother who never got to say goodbye, that's the only way to survive, to keep memory alive, to keep her child's name spoken, not out of grief, but out of love. If you're watching this video, maybe you understand. Sometimes we don't need perfect answers to see the value of a life. Sometimes it's the ache, the missing pieces, the what ifs that make a story feel real. Because it could have happened to anyone, to any family. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Donnie's story. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to Hidden Echoes. Help us bring light to the voices time tried to erase. Every follow, every share. It's one more way to say we're still listening. And we won't let stories like Donnie's disappear in silence.